So now we have a functional navbar, but Rails actually provides us some helpers to generate links that are interchangeable. And so this is an example I want to use for this. So let's go to actually the about down here. So right now we have this hard-coded to /about, but if we ever wanted to change that URL to about us, we would be in trouble. We'd have to go and update this everywhere in our application that linked to the about page. Right now it's just one place, but it could be a bunch of places in the future. So Rails provides a helper called link_to, which is a Ruby helper, and you give it a name and a URL that you want to point to. And so we can call it about path, and you can pass in options like class to map to the anchor class that it will generate. So this is the content that you want inside the anchor, and then the URL that you want to link to, the href, is the second argument, and then your other options like class will go there. Now, the way that this works is that your routes actually can be named. And if you go into your terminal and you run Rails routes, this will actually print out all of the routes for your application. We actually have a bunch that come from Rails itself out of the box, but our routes that we wrote ourselves are listed here. These two that we have. The prefix is actually a name for your route that allows you to reference that in your Ruby code. So this is something you will use very, very often, and this can be named about, and you will add either _path or _URL to use that in Ruby. So in our code we have about _path, and this will generate /about in our HTML that we print out. So if we save this and we refresh our page, we can inspect this element and we'll see that it prints out /about. But what's really cool about these helpers is we can go into our routes and say about us instead, and we want to call this the about route. So we can change the actual URL, but leave the name the same so that our Rails routes command will always print out about as the prefix, and the URL can change. And so our application code doesn't have to be modified whatsoever. We can click on about and it will go to about us. That is a really, really useful thing as your application grows and it changes and you add and move things around. It is super helpful to have these URL helpers. So the as name you can define if you need to give it a name specifically, but it will also be auto-generated for you. So if we have about us without the as, this will auto-generate a name called about _us. So we'll convert the hyphens to underscores for you and give it that name. So by doing that, we can do all kinds of interesting things as our application changes. So let's go back to our navbar and replace these links with regular helpers in our Rails routes. So the root path gets root _path automatically, and we can copy this up here for the navbar brand, and we will say navbar and change this to navbar brand. And that is now functional just like it was before, but we're now using the link_to helper and the URL helpers throughout our application. So that is something that you'll want to do for all of your links. Pretty much you will want to use that link_to helper and the URL helpers from your routes.